Hey guys, this is Matt with Mixcoach. We are here trying to start up a new series. We'd like to call it Fix My Mix, where we offer an opportunity for fellow mix coachers to maybe submit a song or particular tracks they're having trouble with, and we try to help identify some of the struggles they may be having. To kick it off, we had a guy on our pages hit us up with a song he was having trouble with getting everything to kind of lay and get the fullness out, maybe some definition, and a lot of it, as you'll see a lot of stereo tracks here in the session, he just felt that there was some definition just in fullness just not quite there. He's a keyboard player. His name is Kevin Quan. I believe I'm saying that correct. He's actually in Guatemala right now. Great key player, really good key player, as you'll hear in the tracks. But let's just preface this by saying his particular issue is that he's wanting to really nail down is more of a tonal balance thing. So for the sake of this demonstration, it's not necessarily a full mix, but we want to attack the aspect of the mix that you're having issues with. So basically he sent me his files, and I just kind of rough mixed the volume levels, and then for this particular instance I tried to help with identifying tonal things that could be brought out with EQ, compression, in some instances saturation. I'm just going to try to help maybe identify a few key things that may lead him in the right direction. At the same time, if there's anything else I noticed in the session that needed to be pointed out, and I have some notes that I jotted down for you, Kevin. I hope they'll help you. So let's dig in here, and basically I've already went through, identified some of the tonalities I would have fixed to just save time rather than going through the full mix. And we're going to go over each element and break it down, check it out, see what we did. So right now let's just kind of get a listen to some of the tracks. I have everything bypassed except for some gain staging I did, which I'm going to cover here in a minute. Let's see here. I just noticed this was a different session that should have had some of this stuff. I've been having some issues with Pro Tools today, so don't mind me here for a second. I think it was just those two. Okay, sorry about that. It's not really going to matter right now anyways, but let's go ahead and listen to some of just the raw tracks and see what we have here. We'll start with this piano beginning. Or maybe we won't. Oops. Happens to the best of us. And we'll skip ahead here a little bit and check out some of the stuff happening as it builds. Okay, as you can hear, A lot of just synth kind of sounds. You hear Rhodes in there. Again, key player. He processed everything through the keys. I think through a Yamaha motif maybe. Not exactly sure. A few things I want to start out with here, Kevin, for you is I noticed whenever you recorded, if you take a look at your volume levels, everything was pretty sporadic and it needed some gain staging help. Some I did through clip based, but I always used my reference meter, and in this case I was using the Klanghelm VU meter set to -18 dBFS RMS, which is typically the sweet spot for converters, digital or analog, especially emulations, anything like that. So keeping it somewhere anywhere in between here, never peaking real too hard, you're usually going to be hitting a sweet spot, and that's best to record in that area too. There's, especially with as much headroom as we have now with the bit depth, it's the age-old discussion of, should you push it all the way up or, keep more conservative levels. You got to consider the noise floor that you have with 24-bit and up is far more than your signal to noise ratio was with 16-bit, or you're not trying to fight the noise floor of analog. So it's really kind of silly to be pushing everything up and overloading everything, especially when they weren't designed to do that in the first place. A lot of this newer stuff, that's not the way it was meant to be. So try to keep conservative levels in the ballpark of -18 dBFS RMS if you can. That's what I'd suggest. You'll get a much cleaner sound in the end. You'll reserve a lot of headroom for your mix bus, and everything's going to sound a lot cleaner. Now, of course, in some instances, if you're going for a particular effect, by all means, go ahead. But 9 times out of 10, though, when you're just trying to really get a good sound, a good, you got to consider for every 6 dB under digital full scale, you're losing 1 bit. So say that's only going to be 3 and you're still at 21 bits. That's more headroom than you're ever going to hear with your ear in a signal to noise ratio situation. So anyways, enough with the nerdy talk. I went through and gain staged everything for you to get it in that ballpark. And another thing too, gain staging will make mixing so much easier, because you can keep, if you'll notice here, look at all the fader levels. There's nothing crazy going on. And granted, I didn't write anything because that's not the point of this particular instance of issues you're having. But you can keep everything closer to a nominal 0 unity gain reading. And you're going to be able to automate better, because you're going to be sitting where the finer resolution is for your rides. Everything's going to come together much quicker. You don't have faders up and down every which direction. It's really it'll speed up your workflow if you just use some more time ahead and gain stage. Gain stage, gain stage, gain stage. It will help you. Enough of my preaching about that. Another thing I noticed was, I'm not sure if your session was like this or you just made the session like it for me, was that everything was just routed to the main out. There were no subgroups or anything. I highly suggest mixing through subgroups so you can process groups together and run certain things on independent buses that you wouldn't run on something else. Same thing for reverbs. I hardly ever use one global reverb, because you may want to treat the drum reverb with a different time, even though it may be the same plate or hall or whatever you want to use. You may want to EQ it differently. You may just want to use a whole different reverb. That's totally fine. But I'm big on, just as you'll see, I have my drum verb for your keys, the key verb, for the orchestra verb. That's something else to keep in mind. Same thing for delays and stuff like that. I never like putting stuff like that in series with the track. I'd rather run it in parallel on its own aux. But there are some situations where I'll blend it in on the actual insert. Some other things to talk about. Oh, there was a vocal. I'm not using it in this demonstration. It was printed with reverb, and it seems like quite a bit of EQ. I could be wrong, but it sounded like it was processed with quite a bit of EQ and verb. If you can, try to steer clear of printing anything with reverb. That's one of those things that you're not going to get anything back once you print it, and reverb's one of those things you don't want to commit. Unless you're absolutely beyond the shadow of a doubt sure, then go ahead. But I suggest save that for stuff like reverb and effects for in the mix. Now, guitars and stuff like that's different. If you got a great player at a session and they're tracking and they're getting a really good tight, just banging sound through their cabinet, the guitar players favor their favorite delays. Don't get in the way of that. That usually always works fine. Particularly vocals, though. Just be wary of it. Let's see here. On the drums, overall, if you can, say you are a keyboard player, you're doing everything MIDI. Even though after you bounce down your patch, stuff like the bass, even the vocals was a stereo file, but it was printed in mono. Because you can look at that by, we'll take the bass here. If you look at the bass, everything's exactly even on the left and the right files. It was printed to stereo. Consolidate, make it a mono file, because when it comes to making your panning decisions, having just stereo after stereo after stereo after stereo, it's in the end you're saving yourself time when a source should be mono, or typically kicks, like this 808 sounding kick that's on here. I would have that mono. And granted, I'm panning it straight up, and you can make it, just straight on mono if you want like that. But it's just easier when you have certain things that should be mono. Another thing is, again, I'm not sure if the tracks you sent me are the ones you mixed, but everything was just panned hard left, hard right. That creates an image of what is known as big mono, because everything's still going to come out the left and right. In some, like, everything is just right in phantom center. Everything's going to sound in phantom center, and everything just collides. It's hard. You have to use more EQ than you should have to. A lot of times you can reach for the pan knobs and pan something and not have to worry about EQ on certain things, because just by panning it, you reduce the masking effects. So be judicious in your panning. Again, that's another argument of the whole LCR thing. I'm not a believer in that, and although some things should be pan wide, but not everything. That's why we have panorama potentiometers that go from 0 to 100. They weren't meant to be 0 and 100. But that's just my opinion. Let's before we get to the tonality stuff, let me go over a few more things with you, Kevin, that I have here for you that I just would like to point out that you may have done. You just may have gave me a blank session. I noticed there was still some EQ and stuff on it that I took off, and some volume stuff. So that's why I'm particularly pointing this out, just trying to steer you in some direction to see if it'll help you. When you are running a lot of stereo tracks, be mindful too that you have to worry about the pan depth effect that most DAWs have, that when it goes to sum to a bus, there's going to be a 3 dB difference. A lot of people don't pay attention to that or kind of forget about it, and that's the typical setting is negative 3 dB for pan depth of stereo. You don't have to worry about it with mono. It's only stereo. So when you're dealing with a lot of stereo tracks, you can start pushing a bus hard and you don't even know it, because you have everything panned out, and then when that 3 dB change happens on the mix bus, it's totally different. Let's see here. Let me pull. I think it's Command 2. Oh yeah. See, this pan depth is set to negative 2.5. I think most of my sessions are at 3, but anyways, I mean, that you get the idea. It'll vary from room to room and the acoustics and how you should adjust it. But now let's cut to the chase for what he was wanting. That was just some observations of the session you sent, man, that I just wanted to try to help steer you in the right direction. Let's go ahead and take a listen to a little bit of it with what I did, and then we'll break it down. Let me go ahead and get everything back up and running. Make sure the arc stays off. Okay. I'm going to play it a little bit before everything starts to come in. Okay, let's start breaking down a little bit. Another thing I noticed that I was going to talk about, but except this would be a good point to start talking about it. The drums, I don't know how, if you actually recorded them and it was just like a stereo file of them, or if you made a stem of them or had to make a stem of them. But if you can, it's always best to have multi-tracks of drums. If you can have the kick separate, the snare separate, toms, just depending on the music. But certainly at least a kick, a good overhead mic, or if you have stereo, but at least mono. A room mic's always nice to have just as an option, but for sure a good pair of stereos and a kick mic and a snare mic, just to have some options and have them multi-tracked out. Because with this, you're in the situation where you want to verb up the snare or something, and especially EQ wise, you have to treat it like it's a submix of your drum group right out of the hole, which, I mean, it's not the most ideal of situations, but you still what you have to deal with. And in this case, I didn't want to wetten it up too much to where the kick's just lingering out in space, because I'm using an EMT 140 plate on it, and I don't want it to echo for forever in the low end, even though I'm filtering out quite a bit of it through the EMT plugin. Let's go ahead and start. He wanted me to use wave plugins because he has waves, and I would have done it in 11, but I refused to pay for waves upgrades, and there's a few other plugins I wanted to use just to show, for example, that aren't in PT11 yet. Waves, if you're listening, you shouldn't charge for your upgrades. No one charges for the upgrades except you guys, and people make better software. Oop, I don't know if I should say that or not. But, I'm a little bitter about it. Alright. On the kick here, running a pretty typical, I usually run 2 to 3, but this needed some pretty good punch from it. I went with a 4-to-1 ratio, a kick to where you get those snare, an attack where you can get the kick and snare transits through with a pretty quick release, so it snap back and you get some of that quick ambience. It was definitely lacking punch. Let's jump ahead to where it starts playing. I'll go ahead and bypass these here. So that really brought some punch out in it. Then here on the EQ, what we had to do was bring out some of the bottom, because it was just pretty much non-existent in the track, and then I added a little bit in the 3K region to help that snare and the cymbals pop out without it getting too hairy, too brittle on you. So let's take a listen to that. And as you can see, I really didn't even have to use makeup gain because there really wasn't that many low frequencies in there, even be boosted at 6, because you got to remember, if it's not there, you can't boost it. So what was there is it's taking quite a bit to raise up in the mix, and there really wasn't any makeup gain needed. So let's move to the next one in line. It sounds to me like this was kind of like an 808 kind of sample. Let's just listen to it without what I put on it. Not quite thumpy as the 808. I'm thinking 808 in the sound, so that's how I approached it. And again, these are backwards. Anytime I'm big on, if I'm cutting frequencies, I want it before the compressor because I don't want the compressor hitting it. But if I am boosting frequencies, I want it after, so the compressor is just not going haywire over that frequency. So this is with the compression. I kept, a medium slow attack with a pretty slow release, so you're getting that attack, and anything behind it, it's clamping it down, so you're just really hearing the punch from it. That's all you're wanting to hear, but you also want it to release before the next hit. So that's what we were going for there. Now on the EQ, I wanted to get that 808 sound, so I really found where that fundamental low was kicking, raised it a ton with a sharp Q, and then rolled off some of the bottom behind it that really wasn't going to be needed anyways after that. Then I found where it was really popping in the mid-range there and just let it kick through. So let's take a listen. Getting a little bit of that 808 sound now. This was a filter trick I learned from John Merchant that he got from, I'm trying to remember, I know it was on a Bee Gees remaster that they did, trying to get some beef out of the original kick tracks. So there you have that. Let's move on to the bass. In this kind of song, I felt that this thing was going to need to dominate the upper frequencies of a bass and cut out some of the low end to let it have what little bit was in the drum kick track, and then where the 808 was playing. Let's take a listen to it. You really hear the finger and the pop coming, and the click coming. I think it kind of sounds like a picked bass, which picked basses usually live around 2, but for whatever reason on this around 900 it was really pulling it out. On the compressor, I love the SSL compression, man. It's for bass and drums. It's a go-to for sure. Using the variable attack that's program dependent, and a medium release, which is typically go-to for bass. You know, again, that's one of those things where you really want to hear the attack of the bass, just depending on the music. The faster it is, you know, the less you want to hear of the sustain, so it's not, you don't lose that punch of the faster stuff. For something like this where it's a little bit slower, you know, honestly, you can get away with a higher release, but you want to hear that attack. Sometimes you're wanting to hear maybe the sustain, very rarely, because, you know, low end's all about punch, and that's the whole point of once you let that compressor pass that attack, then you want to clamp it down, so it's right up in your face. You get that real punch. I'm running the filter before the compressor here. That's what the split does. I typically try to always run my filters before the compressor. That way you're not hitting certain frequencies so hard on the compressor and you're hearing it pump a lot, unless you're going for an effect. Now we'll move on to the piano, which originally I think was one of the things he was talking about. He doesn't like to use samples. Didn't care for him. He really likes the sound of his Yamaha motif, but trying to get that definition and clarity of a real piano, it can be a challenge sometimes. A lot of keyboards either are really thin with no bottom end, or they have a ton of low mids and sound very fake. In this situation, I think it sounds like he used a little bit of a synth pad with it too over the piano, and it's a good sounding piano. The sample is really not that bad, but overall on a lot of these tracks, which is typical, especially when you're using a lot of MIDI patches, had a lot of low mid buildup, as you'll see. But we'll go ahead and dive into this piano here. I will bypass what I did. Might want to play a little more than that. You can hear a lot of low mid build up there. So let's take a peek here. We'll go ahead and open both of these here at the same time. On the first one, there's a lot of low end attack that I do like, that I don't want to lose, but at the same time, a lot of that just finger hammer hitting and noise that just builds up to around 80 hertz. Gone. See ya. You can, and a lot of times you can get away with a lot, especially a lot of pop piano filtering way higher. But in this situation, there was some of it I wanted to keep, and I was also still going to cut down low anyways to get rid of some of that mud. So I didn't want to filter too much out anyways and just create a hairy mess. After that, you'll see down here I pulled out 200 using a shelf, because by nature shelf EQs have less phase distortion than bell curve EQs, and it tends to sound more natural. And I cut out 3.5 dB there, and also at 350 hertz I knocked out a few dB, and this was all before the compressor. Again, I'm big on subtractive EQ before the compressor and then additive EQ after. And on the top end we ended up adding close to 2K, wide Q, a number of decibels, and I'm not afraid, if I have to yank up an EQ knob. I mean, I don't like to have to. I'd rather get it fixed in the recording phase. But when you're in the situation that you have to do something, I'm not afraid. If it's a good, sweet sounding natural EQ, tear it up. So let's take a listen with just the subtractive EQ and compression. Now let's add the additive. You can hear it just open it up, brought a lot of the harmonics out at the same time, not thinning it out. You could probably actually, this piano would probably actually benefit from a little bit of an air boost too up top. Let's just try it out. Yeah, see, you could even play with it a little bit more. And another thing with keyboard pianos that you can 9 times out of 10 always go to is use some type of harmonic enhancing saturator. In this case, I whipped out the trusty free soft tube that can do some really nice things to bring out, because this is simulating a piano. A lot of times they are samples that have been taken of a real piano, not always. But there's always just a harmonic content lacking typically, especially in cheaper softwares and cheaper patches. And if you reach for a saturation knob, it can really help convince you that it is something that it isn't. Let's just take a listen. Now we're starting to sound like it, it's a real piano. We were tracking in a room, and you're starting to hear the depth and the definition and clarity of it. It doesn't sound so much like it was just going line into an interface through a Yamaha keyboard. And you'll notice he used several. I think he had some Rhodes patches in there and stuff, but for sake of time, I'm jumping ahead a little bit. Is this the one? Now this was a Rhodes patch, and I want to point this out to you. This is a cool trick that I learned from producer Morgan Page, incredible electronic music producer. I'm sure most of you have heard of him, and this is a really cool trick that he uses with the Waves SSL, which a lot of people have probably seen this, and I've really found this to come in handy though if you haven't seen this. He will take, if you want to get that really just kind of belly crystally sound out of a Rhodes but with a little bit of grit on it, clean up some of the low end a little bit, crank up your compressor. Typically I'm probably going to want to use a faster release than that. If you hear a little bit too much distortion on the quick release, you can always bump it up a little bit. But go ahead and bump it up to where you're seeing probably 10 dB of compression, keeping it pretty flat line. And then go over here and go crazy with 3 different knobs. A mid-range frequency, an upper mid, and then a high frequency. And just saturate it with just analog drive goodness out of these circuits. Let's just take a listen. This is without. Check it out. I love this trick. Love it. Highly suggest it when you're wanting that kind of greasy pad sound out of a Rhodes. again, on a lot of these pianos, a lot of the stuff that were created through the patches on all these, I found myself having to cut out a lot of the lows or low mids, with a shelf cut. I also used the Morgan Page theory on this one too. Because they were two similar things kind of playing back and forth off of one another right here on this section. On the toy piano here, there were two different toy pianos that were used. Nice delay on it. Again, I used the compression standard way of setting it. Fairly quick release. The program dependent, normal, variable attack. Low threshold, low ratio, so that way you're keeping a pretty consistent compression on it, but you're not slamming it. It really helps out to level things in a real nice, subtle way and getting that awesome VCA sound out of an SSL. And this is one Waves plugin I love because I've worked on several SSL consoles, and I can truly say that the dynamic section is a pretty good emulation. So are the filters. It's good stuff. Good stuff, Waves. Just wish you didn't charge for upgrades. On this, Kevin, I wanted to bring out that really crispy attack on those high, like bell-like notes, but I didn't want to go crazy with like the whole twist every knob on it like the other ones for effect on the Rhodes samples. So I found a good frequency in the upper mids, used a pretty wide Q and a pretty judicious amount of EQ, brought it up, and I actually added a little bit of low end on this while cutting out the rumble, because I mean anything under 80, 90 on that is just totally unmusical, and it's just eating up low end space for your, getting your bass good and tight. That's a big thing, man. Don't be afraid to use filters on things that really don't even have anything downloaded. Yes, it can induce phase distortion, but that's if it's there. That's if it's audible. There's a lot of things you can get away with on guitars, just massive amounts of high-pass filtering before it induces any kind of phase shift that you would hear audibly. You really have to worry about it on real low-end bass stuff. You got to be careful, especially with linear phase filters, like on a bass or anything with bass frequencies with linear phase. It can cause post-ringing effects that kind of create a reverse reverb kind of sound. You're better off tweaking a just minimum phase high-pass filter if you have to do any high-pass filtering on low-end instruments, which you'll still do that every day. So those are just some things to be mindful of. I think, let's check out the other toy piano. I probably did. No, it sounded quite a bit different. I remember now. I had to bring up quite a bit of 2K because this thing was like all mud, completely all mud. Let's see. Had to go the upright piano kind of direction with that. Kind of sounds like you ran it through maybe an amp simulator or something that induced some distortion. Cool effect. It fit the vibe. For the strings, I had to do some massive amounts of gain staging for those because they were recorded extremely quiet. On all the strings, they seem to have been recorded with a lot of low mids. I had to go through, again, here's another thing. In this kind of stuff, especially when you're using a lot of the same patches, you want to find their own frequency domain to sit in, but at the same time, it's hard when you're using the same thing. So you have to don't try not to overlap cuts or boost. If you have to, separate them a little bit, even if it's by 100 hertz, it will be different, trust me. So in this instance, you have to go through and find, okay, somewhere between 3 and 500, there seems to be quite a bit of buildup on all these, and then you have to choose which ones, okay, this one would be better with the 300 out, this one would be better with the 350 out, instead of the same thing being cut on all of them. Try to break those up from having overlapping cut and boost frequencies to kind of make their own space, even though they're living in the same space, if that makes sense. I hate having to EQ so much. I try to EQ as little as possible, or if my biggest thing is if I'm trying to do it for effect, really. But again, in this circumstance, we're just trying to, not everyone has the most ideal situation, so you have to make do with what you can, and you can make it sound great regardless. I'm a big fan of, I'm not huge on master bus compression, but I do like using certain EQs on the master bus so I can maybe make one global change that I know is going to benefit everything, so you can save yourself from having to do that across multiple tracks. To me, I think that degrades the signal path from the track to the bus to the master bus, having to use multiple bands over and over and over for certain things. So if you can treat it globally, treat it globally. Again, genre dependent. I'm not big on compressors on the master bus. I did use a little bit on this because it fit the genre. But that's just, again, a little bit of theory talk there on my end. But if we just take a look at these strings, you'll notice that I cut out a lot of the low mids where they're built up with when I cut, I typically try to use a tighter Q on subtractive frequencies. And we'll just kind of go over these here. You'll see, again, I just found different frequencies where I felt they were more important in the low mids, where for that particular track where they needed to be pulled out. Even though they're all really living in the same place, it still gave them their own little pocket of where they were going to sit. On the drum bus, I had a little bit of L2 going just to prevent peaks. Nothing crazy. I don't like jamming a bunch of limiters on stuff. On the Orc bus, I actually used the Mag EQ, the airband, up on 20K. Brought up a lot of the top end because I like this. It's awesome for vocals. It's awesome for acoustic instruments like acoustic guitar if you're really wanting some sheen on the top end, or like a mandolin. I love using it on a mandolin. It can really bring out the top end without it sounding brittle. It's that frequency where you kind of just you feel it rather than hear it. You just know it's there. It makes a difference. Like on these strings, we'll just play this section where it's kind of busy with the strings. You can just hear that top end, but you're not getting a lot of the scratchiness from the bow or anything like that. It's just adding a nice sheen to the top without the nasty side effects. For when you're creating, man, there's some great orchestra patches out there now and great sample libraries. Sounds so authentic, and they're cut in such nice places, but again, sometimes they can feel a little bit lifeless just because there's not the true dynamic of it being captured as if you were going to go to Ocean Way and track in their A room, or go over and do it in London Hall, or something extraordinary. So I love using Slate's VTM on string stuff with the IPS set to 15. It brings out a little bit more of that bottom end, and we'll play a couple of different things here, and I'll bypass. just feel it adds so much life. I love everything about this plugin. I run a lot of stuff through it. I'm guilty. Very, very, very guilty. This brings us to the master bus. Let's see what we did to the master bus. And again, this tutorial was purely for tonal balance, things that can be achieved through EQ and compression. And I mean, really, this was a rough I put together maybe 45 minutes to just kind of help you go the right direction, Kevin. And I hope this is helping you. On the master, I use T-Rex bus compressor, the emulation of the SSL master bus. I love this thing. Go demo it if you haven't. You'll love it. Just hitting it a little bit. Running a slow attack, auto release, low ratio, and you can just hear it just gets a little bit tighter. Just a couple of dB is all you got, all you need to do. Man, that's it, and it'll bring it right together and just gel everything. And then on the other end of this, running the trusty old UAD Pultec, bringing out a little bit of top end globally, and just a little bit of a mid dip here. Just a touch, very little. I don't like doing much on the global side of things, but when I do, I think it makes a good subtle difference. So we'll go ahead and play some of it here. And there you have it. I hope this has helped you head the right direction with the tonal imbalances issues you were having with finding that fullness and definition and clarity throughout the whole mix. If you have any questions, you know where to get at me at. And if anyone else has questions, you can email me at matt@mixcoach.com. I'll be glad to help you. Again, we hope to start doing this monthly. If you have a mix where you're having an issue, we'd love to maybe tackle helping a problem you're having. Just give us an email or drop us a line on our Facebook page. You can just look up Mixcoach, you'll find our page. And we'd love to help. I'm trying to see if there's anything else I can cover for you, man, before I wrap it up, because I want to do this in a manner that it's, I want to cut to the chase where you learn what you need to learn, but I don't want to drag it out and bore you to death either. I just noticed that I think on this sweep here I did. Yeah, this little sweep here, it was kind of, just like a little effect, so I treated it like I would an effect. I used a pretty judicious amount of high-pass filtering, and then I got a little creative with the lo-fi here. Did a little bit of bit crushing, and then just a little bit of all this in the grunge section can work magic for just making some really unique, cool sounds. I love this plugin. I use the saturation and distortion all the time on bass and kick drums, especially like sub kicks. It rocks. What a great free plugin from Avid. This is one they did right. That's with it. You can just hear the bite and grit it adds. Let me bypass these two. It's subtle, but it just helped it poke out in the track and have its own little thing. I think that is all. Oh, one last thing right here. Typically I don't always do this, but I'll run well, a lot of times I do. I like to run a frequency spectrum analyzer on the master bus, make sure I'm headed the right direction. And this right here is about the kind of curve you'd want to see. You like seeing your frequency spectrum analyzer to fall off in third octave bits very evenly, starting from around between 50 and 60 and below, and just kind of see it a nice little trail off. That's you're reaching a good balance point when you have a good frequency spectrum like that in your mix. And I just wanted to reference that for you, Kevin, so you could see it. And I hope this has helped you all, and we hope to start doing this monthly. Be sure to, again, if you have questions or if you want to submit or ask about submission, you can email me at matt@mixcoach.com. I hope I haven't rambled too much here. This is the first one we've put together like this, and I really don't know how to approach it yet. So this is, kind of a beta test, if you will. So let me know if you have any questions, comments, feedback. You can comment below, or if you can, just shoot me a direct email, again, matt@mixcoach.com, and I'll be happy to get with you guys. And I look forward to helping you all. And happy mixing. If you haven't checked out mixcoach.com, head over, sign up, join the forums, get the session download, get mixing with us, man. If you love mixing as much as we do, and you've got to get a part of it. And I hope to see you guys soon, and we'll talk to you soon, guys.